Welcome to my fitting math class. Like I said in the class description, this class will kind of be about how you get all the numbers that appear in the fitting window from all the modules you put on your ship. In order to teach this, I have a series of slides which has a lot of the computations written down and stuff. But I'll go over this and make sure it's clear to everybody as we go through this. The slideshow or the document works in the in-game browser, so it shouldn't be a problem. The link's in class.E-UNI. Alright, if anyone missed the link, give an X in class.E-UNI if you weren't in there already. Otherwise, we'll get started. So this class is going to be about how module bonuses are applied and how the two major different module bonuses are differentiated. There are additive bonuses, like the shield extenders and the armor plates, and also some other things such as drone control range and the like. And there are multiplicative bonuses. For example, shield extender rigs, sensor boosters, damage mods, just about anything that has a multiplier to it. We're also going to talk about how stacking penalties are calculated for stats, and how severe those stacking penalties are, and give several examples of that. And also we'll talk about faction mods and how they can kind of work around some of the stacking penalty issues. So the first thing is additive modules. You'll see on the third slide there's a list of modules that have additive bonuses and what they add. This is not an entirely complete list. There are several more, but this is a good selection of them. So additive modules are fairly simple to understand. If you have a base 1563 shield strength and you add a large shield extender 2, you add the number 2625 to 1563 and end up with 4,188 shield HP, more than doubling it. Now, bonuses from a skill like shield management level 4 is a 20% bonus. It's 5% per level. So you take the computed total, the base shield strength plus the large shield extender, and you multiply that total by the 1.2 from your shield management skill, resulting in 5,026 shield HP. Now, these are base shield HP, not effective HP, but I will talk about effective HP later. So I hope there are no questions on how additive modules work so far. Now, multiplicative modules are a little more complicated. And for this, for my examples and my description of how the math works, we'll be using a short form of the bonuses. So if you look at the Power Diagnostic System 2, if you find it in the market, I'll link it here in a moment. There you go. And you look at its attributes. Under Show Info, you will see it has shield recharge rate bonus 8.5%. In order to get the short form bonus I use, and I should note that recharge rate bonus is actually a reduction in shield recharge time. This is a very standard wording for CCP, and it always means a reduction in recharge time. So 8%, if you write it in decimal form, is 0.085, and since it's a reduction, it's negative. So it's a negative 0.085 shield recharge time. It also has a 5% shield HP bonus, which is plus 0.05 shield HP. And similar with capacitor recharge time, capacitor capacity, and power grid. The reactor control unit is plus 15% power grid, so it's plus 0.15 power grid. Does that not make sense to anyone? All right, one moment. I believe I actually gave the wrong link here to the slideshow. I'll put the correct one here. It has the things, but there were some corrections, and I thought I deleted this slideshow, but I accidentally gave you the wrong link. Sorry. That slide was a list of multiplicative modules without stacking penalties, and the ECCM Omni does indeed get affected by stacking penalties. So, sorry about that. All right, so we are on slide 5, and oh, okay. So it did say it was in my trash. Maybe I didn't empty my trash. Well, anyway. Okay, so continuing on. So calculating multiplicative module bonuses is also fairly simple. And my example here is the basilisk. For most basilisk fits, you need around 1200 to 1300 power grid. And the basilisk starts at an 825 power grid base in its show info. If you have engineering at 5, which you probably should have if you're flying a basilisk, that will go up to 825 times 1.25, which is the 25% bonus from engineering. That brings it up to 1031.25. However, even more is needed for most fittings, so adding a reactor control unit 2, which is a 15% bonus, multiplies on top of the 825 times 1.25 number, giving it another 15% on top of that, or 1,185. Medium ancillary current router is another 10%, so plus 0.1, and that brings it up to 1,304. So you can see the simple way to put that here, the function here, it's just 825 times 1.25 times 1.15 times 1.1. So you notice that each of these bonuses, for example, the 25% from max level engineering, we take the plus 0.25 and add it to 1 to get 1.25 before we multiply. That gives us the original plus the 15%, or the 25%, or so on. This adding 1 to the multiplicative bonus will be used throughout these calculations, and I'll show you one where it's kind of a gotcha. So working with additive and multiplicative modules together, like the previous example of the shield HP on the Caracol and the skill bonus, One moment. Yes. Julian Pollard linked a Basilisk fit with a power diagnostics system and an ancillary current router. And that uses a power diagnostic system, which is plus 0.05 power grid, rather than the plus 0.15 of the reactor control unit. Some Basilisk fits can deal with less power grid, particularly if you're using the Meta Shield transporters. But I fly one that uses Tech 2 Shield transporters and uses quite a bit more power grid. Data. Here's the link to the spreadsheet, or the slideshow I'm using. Currently, we're on slide 7. So with additive and multiplicative modules, here I use an Armageddon Navy issue with 4 rolled tungsten plates and hull upgrades 5. The additive modules are added first and as a whole, and then multiplied together with the multiplicative modules. This also has 3 large Trimark armor pumps. So you'll notice that the base armor, nearly 10,000, is added to the 4,200 times 4 for 4 plates. You can simplify the calculations by just multiplying a number of additive modules together into one number. And then you multiply it by all the multiplicative bonuses. You'll notice that the large Trimark armor pumps, I use 1.15 to the power of 3. That's 1.15 times 1.15 times 1.15. It's just a easier way to write out the same thing. And because there aren't stacking penalties, they're all the same number, the power can be used there. So, are there any questions so far? I want to make sure everyone's following this. No questions? All right. So we'll go on to, shield recharge and capacitor recharge. This is kind of a funny thing because the numbers don't entirely, well, there's a massive function involved with the actual capacitor recharge and shield recharge at any point in time. And there's a link here to the University Wiki with a beautiful graph of the recharge time at any point in your current shield level versus your maximum shield level. You'll notice that this function comes kind of close to 2.5 at around a little under or around 30%. Where exactly it peaks out isn't entirely clear, and also where the exact multiplier where it peaks out at isn't entirely clear. But in general, the in-game fitting window for passive shield recharge uses the factor of 2.5 times the average recharge time. So, for example, a Drake has a shield capacity of 5,469 shield HP and a recharge time of 1,400 seconds. This is in the show info. This is without skills. If you want to find the average shield recharge for it, you divide the HP by the recharge time. So you get a number of HP per second. For a Drake, that's 3.9. In order to get the peak recharge, the amount of damage you can survive indefinitely, you multiply that average recharge by 2.5, which gives you 9.77 about. This means that anybody doing more than 9.77 damage to you will be able to get through your shield's recharge. So if we continue with this, what happens when you add an additive module, like a large shield extender. The additive module affects the shield HP but doesn't change the recharge time. So you increase the numerator. Instead of dividing 5,469 by 1,400, you divide 8,094 by 1,400 before multiplying by 2.5. That gives you a recharge time of, a shield HP per second of 14 by 0.45. This is what you'd see in your fitting screen if you had no shield skills and were sitting in a Drake. Not that anybody would be sitting in a Drake with no shield skills, but that's beside the point. Note that a large shield extender has increased the recharge time by nearly 50%, which makes it far more effective than anything like a shield recharger, which is a mere a little bit more than 15%. So let's look at a shield recharger. It applies a minus 15% change to the shield recharge time, or minus 0.15. Like we were talking about earlier, you add the bonus to 1. In the case of this one, it's a negative number. So it becomes 1 plus negative 0.15, or 1 minus 0.15. That becomes 0.85. If you multiply the shield recharge time of 1,400 seconds by 0.85, you get 1,190. That gives you the new denominator. 8,094 over 1,190 times 2.5 is about 17 shield HP per second. Now, the next one is an example of quite a few mods working together, along with skills. So shield management 4, which is plus 20% shield capacity, shield operations, which is minus 20% shield recharge time, and then the Drake has 2 large shield extenders, 2 shield rechargers, and 2 shield power relays. The calculation, you start with the numerator, 5,469 plus 2,625 times 2. That multiplies the large shield extender, makes it 2 large shield extenders. And then you multiply that entire number by 1.2 for the shield management skill. And then the denominator is 1,400 times 0.8 times 0.76 to the power of 2. That's the shield power relays, which are each 24% reduction in the shield recharge time. And they're squared because there are 2 of them. And 0.85 to the power of 2. Those are the shield rechargers, and there are 2 of them. And then we multiply the entire result by 2.5 to get the peak recharge of 68.8 before resists. So does everybody follow that equation? I want to make sure. Do you all see where all those numbers came from? All right. And just to let you know, capacitor recharge rate calculations are absolutely identical, besides the fact that you'll never have any effective capacitor recharge calculation related to resists. So, sorry to hear that, Data. Anyway, so here we have damage mods and rate of fire calculations. The damage mods have 2 effects. They have the increase in damage and the increase in rate of fire. The rate of fire listed in the damage mods, like the gyro stabilizer, the ballistic control, the heat sink, and the magnetic field stabilizer. These increase the number of cycles in a given time. So if you normally would fire 100 shots in 5 minutes, say, adding one damage mod, like a Tech 2 gyro stabilizer that has a plus 0.105 rate of fire bonus, it'll make you fire 110.5 shots in that same 5 minutes. In order to determine the actual module duration that this gives you, you actually have to divide 1 by that number, or basically invert it. So you'll see here 1 over 1.105 is about 0.905. So that's a 9.05% reduction to the weapons module duration. That's kind of a tricky thing. You'll notice at the bottom of this, it doesn't matter too much for just calculating DPS, but it can matter if you want to know the actual duration of the module. So if you take a look at the 125mm Gatling autocannon 1, it has a 3-second rate of fire and a damage multiplier of 2.0625. I don't know why it's such a precise damage multiplier, but the EMPS ammo does a total of 12 damage among EM, explosive, and kinetic. Mostly EM, a little bit of explosive, and a tiny bit of kinetic. So the base DPS of that gun with EMP small ammo would be 12 times 2.0625, the damage multiplier of the weapon, divided by 3-second duration. And that comes out to 8.25 DPS. That's without skills again, whether they're from the ship or independent. This is entirely without skills. You can't actually fit a Gatling autocannon 1 without a skill in it. So ignore the fact that that's never actually possible. Putting a single gyro stabilizer on the ship as well would increase both the damage and decrease the module duration. So you'd end up with the DPS of 12 times the weapon bonus, 2.0625, times 1.1 from the damage bonus of the gyro stabilizer, the plus 0.1 damage. And then you divide that by the module duration, which is 3 times the number we calculated before, which is 1 over 1.105. If you can actually simplify it, because multiplying something by 1 over a number is the same as dividing it by the denominator of 1. So you end up with 3 over 1.105. And of course, that can be transferred back into the numerator as a multiplier, which means that basically you're multiplying that rate of fire increase that's listed on the damage mod into the damage. So basically you can think of the number they list from the gyro stabilizer as a second damage number. So it's 1.1 times 1.105, and then just divided by the base rate of fire of the weapon. And that results in 10.03 DPS. Now, the skill and ship bonuses, like, for example, the Tempest has a rate of fire bonus of 5% per level. Those reduce the weapon duration directly. So the rapid firing skill is minus 0.04 per level. A level 4, that's 0.84 multiplier to the cycle time. That is not inverted the same way the gyro stabilizer is. So you get you have to multiply that into the rate of fire directly. And note that the Tempest, it's 5% per level increase or decrease in module or weapon module duration. Can anybody quick do the math and tell me how much DPS increase that bonus gives you for level 5 Minmatar battleship at 5% per level? Yeah, I actually had a discussion with Seamus about one of the modules I listed in here, wondering whether it was stacking penalized or not. Anyway, so the Tempest 5% per level reduction in the rate of fire means it's a 1 over 0.75 damage bonus. Which is a 33% bonus to your damage at level 5 Minotaur battleship, which is more than it would imply by being a 5% per level bonus. So, you might keep that in mind. Alright, so is everybody following this? Is there anything I could go over again that might help you guys in a different way? Alright. So now we get to stacking penalties. So stacking penalties are diminishing returns applied to the bonuses of multiple sources of the same effect, or multiple effects from similar sources, sorry. So stacking penalties are there to prevent this exponential rise of the power of your stats by stacking the same module onto the same thing so many times. For example, you know that passive shield tanking can get pretty ridiculous when you get a Drake filled out with recharge mods, or a Myrmidon, or a Hurricane. I mean, just about anything. You can stick a whole ton of mods on there, have amazing passive shield tank. That's because it's all exponential. CCP didn't want that to happen for everything, especially things like damage, because that would impact diversity. People would fill their low slots with damage mods and forget about just about anything else that could go in a low slot. So in come stacking penalties. And you'll see on slide 12 the stacking penalty formula, and I have pre-computed these out to 10. That's probably more than most people pre-compute them out to, but I wanted to have a list to demonstrate how small the numbers get. And they get even smaller than this. I mean, infinitesimal numbers after 10. So how do we use this formula to calculate actual module effects? So here's a little math thing related to sets, and that's the way I like to think of it. It's a pretty simple set thing if you have ever done sets, even if you haven't done sets before. So take A as the set of all bonuses to a single stat affected by stacking penalties, and have that set sorted from highest to lowest. Now, positive bonuses and negative bonuses each get their own set, but for now, let's just think of it simple. These are in the short form, like plus 0.3 targeting range from a sensor booster 2. And we'll have set A prime, which is the set of all bonuses that will actually be applied after stacking penalties. So for every number in set A, its corresponding number in set A prime is multiplied by the stacking penalty of its position in the set. So, an example for this. Let's say you've got a ship with 4 sensor boosters of different types here, just to make it the numbers a little bit different so we can actually sort the set. Well, so that it matters how we sort the set. So we've got 2 sensor booster 2s. One of them has a targeting range script in it, which makes it a plus 0.6 targeting range, or 60% bonus to targeting range. Sensor Booster 2, unscripted, 0.3 targeting range, and 0.3 scan resolution. And then similar, one scripted and one unscripted Sensor Booster 1 for 0.5 and 0.25 plus 0.25. So for your targeting range, your set becomes 0.6, 0.5, 0.3, and 0.25 because they're in descending order. That means A prime becomes 0.6 times the first stacking penalty, 0.5 times the second stacking penalty, 0.3 times the third, and 0.25 times the fourth. If we grab the numbers from the earlier slide and stick them in, it's 0.6 times 1, 0.5 times 0.87 about, 0.3 times 0.57, and 0.25 times 0.28. The resulting bonuses here are listed as well, 0.6, 0.434, 0.171, and 0.070, or 0.07, about. So you'll notice that the last number in the list, the one that came from the targeting range bonus of the unscripted Sensor Booster 1, went from 0.25 or 25% bonus down to a 7% bonus. And you use these numbers just as you would any other bonuses. You have the 1.6, or 1 plus the 0.6, times 1 plus the 0.43, and so on. And you multiply those all together, and that gets your factor. So the amount you would multiply it with the base targeting range, which is about 2.87, or 88. Which is a good bonus, because you've got a lot of sensor boosters, and 2 of them are scripted. Now notice here for targeting range, targeting range would be 2.878, which is 287 of your normal. For the scan resolution, you use a completely separate set. You take all the bonuses to scan resolution and you put them in the set. So we've got 0.3 scan resolution from the unscripted Sensor Booster 2 and the 0.25 from the unscripted Sensor Booster 1. And you do the same computation with those. And you end up with the scan resolution factor. Now, those are sorted separately. Even though the sensor booster, the 2 scripted sensor boosters were the first 2 that were stacking penalized in the targeting range, and the unscripted ones got affected by significant stacking penalties, the scan resolution is kind of calculated independently, even if the modules are in a different order. That makes sense, right? All right. So here's a list. Next is a list of stats that are commonly stacking penalized from both mods and rigs, such as damage and tracking, sensor range and resolution, speed and agility, ECM strength and range, resistances, signature radius bonuses, and shield booster strength. Now note, I should note here, I should actually put in another slide for this. After you're done with these bonuses for targeting range and scan resolution, then you do, as separate sets, the penalties from, for example, remote sensor dampeners, or having a cloak on your ship, or having warp core stabilizers on your ship. Those are actually calculated independently of the bonuses. The penalties are. So the most significant penalty gets top spot in its set, and then the next one, and then the next one. So having a bunch of sensor boosters doesn't stacking penalize penalties or anything. So anyway, stats that are rarely stacking penalized or never stacking penalized, power grid and CPU. You can stack that however high you want. You can put capital shield boosters on battleships. You can put one of the capital autocannons that the Minmatar dreadnoughts use on an Amar Armageddon Apocalypse Navy issue. It wouldn't be very effective, I can tell you that much. It's like 12 DPS or something. It's really small, but it would be amusing to see that thing sitting on a Amar battleship. Shield and capacitor recharge time. You can stack shield and capacitor recharge all you want without stacking penalties. Shield, armor, and structure HP. The HP itself is not stacking penalized, however, resistances are. Shield booster and armor repair capacitor use and duration. There are rigs that affect the capacitor use for shield boosters and armor repairs and their duration, and those are not stacking penalized. However, shield boost amplifiers, the bonus to shield boosting is stacking penalized. So there are sources as well of stats that are not stacking penalized, and these include skills. If you have skills, they're never in these sets. Ship bonuses. For example, the Tempest's rate of fire and damage bonus will never be stacking penalized. The Drake's shield resistance, never stacking penalized. Then there's implants. I know of one exception, which is the Snake set of implants, which increases ship velocity. I'm not exactly sure how that stacking bonus or stacking penalty works, but do some research before you get a Snake set if your ship has a lot of speed mods on it, because you may not be getting the kind of bonus you expect. Then boosters. If you pop a blue pill that gives you better shield boosting, it's not going to stacking penalize with your shield boost amplifiers. And finally, damage controls. They give great resistances across the board, and especially their structure resistance, which nothing else can provide, but the armor and shield resistances, you'll never have stacking penalties from the damage control. So, all good things to keep in mind. So I have here a targeting range example with skills, and it's pretty simple here. Just a couple sensor boosters and the long-range targeting skill at 4. And so you calculate the stacking penalized stats, and you multiply them together, and you get your result, and then you multiply in your skill without stacking penalties. Melivian multiple damage controls don't have stacking penalties. They wouldn't if you could put more than one damage control on your ship. It's actually entirely impossible to drag and drop the second damage control onto your ship. The game will give you an error and not let you put it on. Alright, so I should ask, does anybody have any other questions here so far? Alright, looks good. So here I want to note that all sources of bonuses are counted. That means whether it comes from your ship or possibly an enemy ship. So here, for example, I have a Drake with 3 shield rigs with the shield rigging skill at 1, which means a 9% bonus to signature radius. It's also got 2 inertial stabilizer 2s, which are generally not a good idea to put on most combat ships, which adds 20% to the signature radius. And it also has a micro warp drive, which adds 500% to the signature radius. And we'll consider it fighting an enemy with 2 target painter 1s fit, without any skills. And the Drake also has 1 large shield extender too. So first, the base signature radius of a Drake is 285 meters. 25 meters is added for the large shield extender, which simply adds, it's an additive bonus. So the signature radius comes up to 310 meters. The shield rigs and inertial stabilizers. The shield rigs have a base bonus of 10%, but with shield rigging 1, it's only 9%. So that's plus 0.09. Inertial stabilizers are plus 0.2. So you'll see here the stacking penalty set and calculate it out. You have the numbers there. And if you multiply all those together, you get a 1.533x multiplier, or about 475 meters. Now let's continue the example and say that the enemy of this Drake just put 2 target painters on it. 1 target painter is a plus 0.25 bonus. If 2 of these are activated, they take top spot in the stacking penalty set. So you notice everything else got pushed down. The 0.25s take the top 2, 0.2 takes the next 2, those are from the inertial stabilizers, and the 3.9s take the last 3. Those are from the rigs. This results in 1.816 bonus to sig radius, which is 563 meters. So it went from 475 to 563, which is not as bad as it could have been if the ship did not already have things like the shield rigs and the inertial stabilizers. So you can see that stacking penalties is kind of working for the Drake in this case, because when you add the target painters, its own effects get reduced. Now let's continue the example and look at a microwarp drive, and this is where kind of the gotcha of the +1 comes in. One person mentions cruise missiles hitting for full on this Drake. Cruise missiles probably would hit for full on this Drake. It's at least with the target painters. So if the Drake activates its microwarp drive, which adds a +5 bonus to sig radius, it outstrips all the other bonuses. But it does take up a spot for stacking penalty, which is 5.0. Everything else gets stacking penalized. The final result would be 9.043 times its normal sig radius, or 2,803 meter sig radius. Ships would lock it instantly. Any cruise missile that hits it when it wasn't actually moving for whatever reason would do full damage. However, its speed would be significantly higher and it might not do full damage because of that. If we compare this to the 563 meter sig radius from before it was turned on, you'll notice that it's a 4.979 times that sig radius instead of times 6, because the microwarp drive has a plus 5.0 bonus, which means it's 1 plus 5.0 multiplier, or 6x multiplier. I hope that makes sense, because it's 500% more sig radius. So instead of multiplying it by 6, you're only multiplying it by 5 because of stacking penalties on all the other mods you have on the Drake. Does that make sense to everyone? Alright, so that's how kind of stacking penalties can work for you. So now let's take a quick look at faction modules. The Gyro Stabilizer 2 has a 0.1 damage bonus, or 10%. With 4 gyro stabs, you get stacking penalties, and it comes out to about 1.3x multiplier. Adding another T2 gyro stabilizer adds a 0.01 bonus, about 1.1 over what you would get with 4 gyros. Now note that this is only the damage bonus. It doesn't have the rate of fire bonus added in. So adding a 5th T2 gyro would increase your damage a bit more than this, probably around 2.2%. On the other hand, if we take one of the gyro stabilizer 2s off and put a Republic Fleet gyro stabilizer on, that gives a plus 0.125 damage bonus. That takes up the top spot in the stacking penalties list. And the others are still stacking penalized, but you come out to a 1.329 multiplier. That's a 2.3% damage bonus, which is more damage bonus than the 5th T2 gyro. So you can see faction mods can kind of take the highest, the least affected by stacking penalties slots, and give you significant bonuses to your ship at the cost of reducing fitting requirements and leaving you with some free slots. There are other faction mods out there which affect other stats, but especially with resistances, where it's kind of inverted, where having fewer big bonuses is better than having many small bonuses. The faction resistance mods, faction webs and stuff can be extremely valuable. So, any questions about that? I know I didn't say much about faction mods, but it should be kind of obvious how they really help you, especially with stacking penalized stats, now that you understand stacking penalties. Right, well, they are big money, but if you're trying to push your ship to the limit, they're kind of must-haves. Alright, so I want to pass on one concept here of armor and shield resistances. Do most of you know what a gestalt is? Like, if you've ever seen an image where you have kind of the face and the lamp, you can kind of see the faces on either side, or you can see the lamp in the middle, but you can't see them both at once. That's called a gestalt. And you can kind of look at shield and armor resistances the same way, because every shield and armor resistance is a shield and armor vulnerability. And it makes the calculations for resistance real easy. If you have no shield resistance, you have 100% shield vulnerability, 40% kinetic shield resist, 60% kinetic vulnerability. If V is vulnerability in decimal and R is resistance in decimal, just subtract it from 1. Vulnerability is 1 minus resistance. Resistance is 1 minus vulnerability. It's that simple. So a hurricane shield resistance, base resistances for a lot of T1 ships. EM is 0, thermal 0.2, kinetic 0.4, explosive 0.5. To get vulnerabilities, EM is 1, thermal is 0.8, kinetic 0.6, explosive 0.5. So how can we use these vulnerability numbers? Well, calculate effective damage makes it really easy. If you have a ship or a missile that does 100 thermal damage, you simply multiply it by the vulnerability. So 100 times 0.8 for base 20% thermal resistance, 80 shield damage. Now, not all ammo is signal single damage type, EMP ammo. If you have a ship shooting it, and it has a raw DPS of 500, you can calculate the damage against a T1 Hurricane, or a Hurricane with no resist mods. Since EMPS has 12 damage points, all the sizes of the different ammos are just times 2, times 4, and times 8 or something like that. So you can use the small ammos for all these calculations. You add up the damage types and you divide it by the number. Well, okay. You divide it by the total damage of the ammo, and then you multiply back in kind of the components. So 500 DPS divided by 12 is 41.67 DPS. So you multiply back in the components. 41.67 times 9, which means it has 375 EM DPS, 41.67 kinetic DPS, and 83.34 explosive DPS. Now you can multiply those into the shield vulnerabilities and add them back up. You get EM is the straight 375 DPS, the kinetic is 25 DPS, and the explosive is 41.67 DPS. Added together, 441.67 DPS instead of 500 against the shield resists of T1 ships without any mods. Everybody find that pretty simple? Any confusion on any of it? All right. You got it now, though? All right. So, resist mods. The resist bonuses come in a few different flavors: passive, active, ship, and damage control. Passive mods, you may know those from like the resist stamps and stuff. And they also include rigs and nanomembranes. These are all stacking penalized, and there are some skills that improve the effectiveness of some of them. The resist stamps and the nanomembranes especially. Rigs, not so much. Active mods, you have to turn those on for their full static bonus. Some of them give a small bonus based on skills, but it's usually not particularly significant. These are all affected by stacking penalties, including the Siege Warfare Links Shield Harmonizing, which is the leadership bonus mod. If you have somebody in a leadership position running one of those, and everybody has massive shield tank or shield resistances already, that's going to get stacking penalized and not be nearly as effective as it might seem initially. Then there are ship bonuses, and those are for having skill with the ship class. For example, the Drake and the Ferox actually both have 5% per level shield resistances from having the battlecruiser skill. Similar with the Roke and the Merlin and several of the Amar ships have armor resistances from skills as well. Sure, somebody can name some of them. I'm not very good with Amar ships, sorry. These are never stacking penalized. Similar to the above slide, I mentioned that no ship bonuses are ever stacking penalized. And then the damage control is the unique low slight module. It affects all resistances on the ship, takes up a tiny amount of capacitor, and it's the only mod that affects structure resists by 50% or more. So you're doubling your structure HP. It's not stacking penalized. So let's look at some resistance bonuses that are applied without having to calculate stacking penalties. So we're only going to have one mod that affects each stat here. For this example, I use a Drake with an adaptive invulnerability field and a damage control 2. Some people might wonder why I call it an adaptive invulnerability field. That's because they changed the name on you a few days ago. The damage control 2 and battlecruiser 4. There's only one mod here that's affected by stacking penalties, and that's adaptive invulnerability field. So it has its full effect. So these bonuses are applied to the ship's vulnerabilities. It's more complicated to apply them to resistances directly because you have to calculate the vulnerability, multiply it in, then multiply the resistance or add the resistance back out into the resistance, and it's all complicated. It's easier to work with it as vulnerabilities all the way to the end and then get the resistance afterward. So if you look at the show info window on a Drake, it has the standard T1 resists. As vulnerability, EM1, thermal 0.8, kinetic 0.6, and explosive 0.5. The same math for any bonuses, you can calculate the vulnerability for the shields. You have 1 times 1 plus negative 0.2, so it's basically 1 minus 0.2. And that's from the Battlecruiser 4 skill. Similarly, 1 plus the negative 0.3, which comes from the invulnerability field. And also 1 plus negative 0.125, which comes from the damage control 2. If you calculate that out, you get 0.49. Similar with thermal, kinetic, and explosive. And then you just subtract them all from 1, and you get the actual resists, which gives you 51% EM, 61 thermal, 71 kinetic, and 76 explosive. And yes, the Drake has OP resists. Now, that's pretty simple without stacking penalties. It's not that much more complicated with stacking penalties, though, because we already looked over plenty of examples earlier where we calculated stacking penalized bonuses. So if you're not happy with 51% EM resist, you can add an EM ward field that used to be the photon scattering field, and Tech 2 because it's better, which gives a minus 0.55 bonus to the ship's EM resists. Actually, EM vulnerability. Also, I'd like to point out that calculating these as vulnerabilities seems to be the way that CCP is doing it, because if you actually look at these shield resist mods, and I'll pull up the EM ward field. If you look at this EM ward field, you'll notice EM damage resistance bonus is negative 55%. It's negative in here, and to calculate it with these vulnerabilities, you use the negative number. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. Or just as a point of interest. So you only need to calculate the stacking penalties for the EM resists. Even though the invulnerability field takes position 2 in the stacking penalty set for the EM resist, it's calculated individually. So your thermal would still have the invulnerability field as slot 1. So you have EM, the EM calculation would be 1 times 0.8 times 0.875 times 0.45 times 0.7393, which comes out to about 0.233 or 77% EM shield resists. So EHP, I'm sure you've all heard of that number, and you've seen it in game, you've seen it talked about and stuff like that. It's kind of an abstract calculation, so it has no basis on the real world. It tells you how much damage pre-resistance is required to destroy your ship. Because it varies depending on what kind of damage is targeted at you, it'll never be accurate as far as the real world is concerned. The in-game fitting window shows the single damage type that gives you the worst EHP. So the in-game one will show you, for example, kinetic straight through, all the way through shields, armor, and structure, and display the EHP with the resistance calculated in. So also keep in mind that we did calculate effective damage for EMP ammo earlier. If you calculate the effective damage, you don't need to calculate effective hit points because your effective damage works off raw hit points. Effective hit points works off raw damage, so you only need to calculate one of them. It's kind of similar. So for calculating the EHP, if we look at our Hurricane again, it has 4,297 shield HP, 4,688 armor HP, and 3,516 hull HP. I know it's sometimes called structure HP, but I wanted a short way to type it: SHP, AHP, and HHP. So to calculate the effective hit points, you divide the base values by the vulnerability, then add them together. So the individual damage type EHPs for a Hurricane with absolutely no skills and no fitting: 4297 over 1 plus 4688 over 0.4 plus 3516 over 1. And you'll notice here I calculated amount, and the lowest would be thermal at 16,100 EHP. So thermal's the best to shoot at an untanked, unskilled Hurricane. It's actually the best to shoot at an untanked Hurricane, whether or not they have skills. But that's also the one that the in-game fitting window is going to display. If you want to find EHP against a given damage profile, like EMP ammo, you need to calculate out the damage distribution and get an average of the vulnerabilities. So you notice here for uniform damage distribution, you just add them together and divide by 4 because there are 4 factors. You divide by 4, you get 0.725. You do the same with the armor resist, and finally calculate the EHP by using those resistances, those vulnerabilities in the EHP calculation. 16,388 effective hit points. If you use EMP projectile ammo, you have to weight it using the ammo's distribution. Like we found before, the EMP ammo has 12 damage points, 9 in EMP, 9 in EM, 1 in kinetic, and 1 in kinetic and 2 in explosive. So you kind of weight your average. So you multiply the EM resist by the 9 damage points. You multiply the kinetic resist by 1, and you multiply the explosive by 2, and then you divide by 12. You get 0.8833. Similar with armor resists, and when you do the EHP calculation, you end up with 17,528. So somebody would have to do 17,528 raw EMP damo, or damo, man, damage to kill your ship. And the last okay, are there any questions about those EHP calculations or anything related to that? Alright, so the last thing I want to talk about is effective tank. Similar to the calculations for effective hit points is the calculation for effective tank. Up in slide 9, there was a Drake we calculated the passive shield resist for. It had 68.8 hit points per second passive shield regen. Similarly, in slides 26 and 27, we calculated the vulnerabilities for a Drake, with one invulnerability field and one EM ward field. We can put those two together and find the effective tank of that Drake. And it's very similar to the effective hit point calculation, except we are only looking at the shield resists, because that's where our tank number comes from. The 68.8 HP per second is shield regen only, so we're only looking at the shield resists. So we use the shield regen and the vulnerability numbers, and you just divide the shield regen by the vulnerability. For EM damage, you get about 295 effective hit points per second. Thermal, you get about 176. Kinetic, you get about 234, and explosive, you get about 281. You can also use a weighted resist for uniform damage distribution, where you just add up the vulnerabilities and divide by 4, and use that as the divisor. So it's 68.8 divided by the average, 236 EHP per second. And against EMP ammo, 68.8 over the weighted calculation. We use 9 points from the EM resist, or vulnerability, 1 from the kinetic and 2 from the explosive, and divide that by 12. You get 287 effective hit points per second. And note that that Drake did not have core defense field purgers. So you could get another 50% around effective tank by adding the field purgers. So are there any questions about that? And are there any questions for the entire class? Because that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. All right. Malavan asks, how were these equations defined? Most of this was experimentation. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it, you put a module on a ship and see what happens to the numbers, and kind of understanding math. You can kind of see how all the numbers work together. Yeah, skills are great because they're not stacking penalized. They do great things, and I mean they multiply with all the mods you put on your ship. So you increase your rate of fire with some mods, you increase your rate of fire with your skills, and they work together to increase your damage. So. Yeah, I'll try and have the class recording up so you guys can go over it again. I hope I didn't go too fast, and please, please email me if you have any questions. Email me if you have any suggestions. Forum PM me even. I might even respond faster. Whatever you feel like. Zanthra Shard, Z-A-N-T-H-R-A, space S-H-A-R-D. Yeah, and I'll try and get this up on the web. So I'll be holding this class again a couple weeks from now after FanFest, and I'd love to have some suggestions for the next one. And take care, everybody.